Welcome back, witches. We are talking mistakes and regrets in my witchcraft practice today. I mentioned before that I haven't been super connected with it, and next week I wanted to talk a little bit about rekindling your practice and what that could look like if you've also been feeling a little burnt out or just want to get back into the swing of things. So first, I thought it might be helpful to talk about some of the mistakes and regrets that I felt with my own practice and a little bit about my changing beliefs. Everyone is going to have mistakes when it comes to a witchcraft practice. That's just something that happens, and no matter what you are practicing, no matter what you're learning, what the hobby is, you are going to have mistakes. That is just a part of life, and that is how you learn. I don't have too many regrets, but I do have a few. So let's dive into sort of what went wrong over the years, in the many years that I have been practicing witchcraft. First up is something that I have mentioned before from the start of my practice, but that's improper tracking. I always talk about the importance of having some sort of grimoire or book of shadows where you are documenting your journey, and I just did not do that very well in the beginning. I think in the very beginning I didn't do it at all, and after that I started sort of writing things down, but it wasn't really the right information. It's just kind of like the basics. But now I make sure that I'm writing down what I'm learning, if I do a spell, when I do it, like all the components of it, day of the week, timing, all of the little details that I can think of, I include when I write those down. Because otherwise, when I go back to look at it to see how a spell manifested or didn't, or if I want to take it apart, I'm not going to be able to do any of that without having all of that information written down someplace. So whether that's online, I have the digital grimoire. That's a template. If you are over on Patreon, you can pick that up. And I have written books as well where I document all of that. But now I'm so much better about tracking, and I really wish that at the beginning I was better about it and I could have that to look back on, because there's just so much that I don't remember what I was doing, and I would love to see how things have changed over the years. So that was definitely a mistake. I have not had spells backfire where they are completely the opposite, or like something bad happened or just not what I intended at all. So I don't know how common that is for other people. That might be a mistake, but for me, they just either didn't work at all, like a spell just wouldn't manifest, or it wasn't exactly in the way I intended because I wasn't specific enough. So that's like a little bit of a mistake there, but I think that is something that's very common and just a mistake that you're going to learn with over time. It just comes with practice and honing your skills and figuring out exactly how specific you need to be when setting your intentions and pulling your correspondences. Just something that has come over the years, and I don't think will ever really go away, but that's why it's so important to write these things down so I can go back and look at it. If the spell hasn't manifested yet, I have to go back and check why not and do some tweaks to fix that. And the last mistake that I wanted to mention was being too strict in things for too long. And we'll get to that in the, sort of like what I wish I knew when I started. But I started out like following teachings of other witches and like what they wrote down, and I was just way too strict in following that for way too long. Everyone's going to be really different in their path and what does or doesn't work for them, and you kind of got to be willing to like go with the flow and roll with the punches. And so when something that worked really well for somebody else doesn't work for you, you have to be willing in that moment to change it. And I stuck with like the strictness for too long, and I figured it was just me and I had to do things like better, but it turns out it just didn't work for me, and I had to make some tweaks to what somebody else was doing and what they were teaching to fit better with my own life and my own associations that I had with like the correspondences that I was trying to use. So I absolutely wish that I sort of did things for myself. It was great to learn and have like a path to follow and see what other people were doing, but I wish that I wasn't so strict with that for so long and instead adopted it to myself and my own beliefs. As far as regrets, I have two main ones, but one is really just tools I regret buying. So let's jump into that first. Tools that I regret buying. I think you might be surprised to learn books is on that list. I love books, I love buying books, I love owning books and reading. So it's hard to say that I truly regret books, but in the beginning, there were some that I bought just because I wasn't utilizing the library like I should have been. So I was buying books that didn't align with my path. They were like very Wiccan based, and I ended up not using them, not loving them, and then just getting rid of them in some way. And that just feels like such a waste of money when I could have checked that out at the library, realized it wasn't for me, and sent it back. When I was younger, that was not as much of an option. There weren't as many things available at the library, but now there definitely are, and I do not run into that problem as much anymore. Most of the time, the library does carry what it is that I want to check out, and then if I end up loving it, then I will buy it and add it to my collection. I also regret buying just too many of a certain item at one time. So herbs comes to mind, where instead of just buying like one and really learning about it, working with it, feeling its energy, figuring out its use in my practice, buy like 10 different herbs at once. And it's just, for me, impossible to work with that many at once and figure out exactly what they do and how I like working with them, how they work well in my practice. Just too much. So I would get overwhelmed and then do nothing. So buying too many of them at once was definitely a mistake. And I have done that with candles too. Instead of just buying, a yellow candle and working with that color, I would get like a rainbow pack, like a pack of crayons, and just have so much overflow that it would get me overwhelmed. And when there's too much stuff around, I just shut down and do nothing. And not that I bought too much of it, but I do regret buying incense, just general stick incense at all, because I don't like it. And it was just something in the scent that really didn't work for me. I don't like smoke cleansing that much. I do kind of want to get a backflow incense burner, like the cones, backflow cones. I think they look kind of cool, and that like focus direction might be better. But I have to be very specific in what I buy in scents, because most incense bothers me. Most of the scents I do not like. There's something underlying in there that reminds me too much of the Catholic Church, and I don't like it. So I have to smell them beforehand. But I just regret buying incense sticks because I have never used them. I think I used maybe like 2, and I was like, this is not for me. I figured that out very quickly. I do regret buying fancy grimoires, the ones that are really expensive. They've got like leather covers, maybe that are decorated. They have the parchment paper insides are like worn to make them look old. They're beautiful, but I don't like my own handwriting or creative skills enough to make them useful. So I would just put off using them at all. And it was kind of just a waste of money that they would be sitting there completely blank. Or then when I did start filling them in, I just didn't like the way that it looked, and it all just felt like a giant waste of money, especially if you're just using it for spell tracking purposes. You fly through them really quickly. You can just get notebooks at the dollar store and fill those out and then be done with it and not waste all of that money. So besides those tools I regret buying, the one thing that I do regret, and I just regret not doing it sooner, is getting somebody else to read my birth chart for me. There is so much information contained within your birth chart, so much more than your big 3, your sun, your moon, and your rising sign. So many different things in there about like the planets and aspects and houses that really give great insight into your personality. And I wanted to do it for myself. I still do, but I think I need some sort of workbook and time to better like figure it out for myself. But in the meantime, I went ahead and got it read by a professional. There are lots that you can work with out there. And that was so helpful in getting more insight into my personality, and specifically into my witchcraft, and like helping my path and what I'm good at and what I like to learn about, and just the ways that I use and relate to the information in general. And I think a lot of us millennials are in that very like witchy occult space because we all have Pluto and Scorpio. If you were born from like 83 to 95, I think it is, there's like a couple months at the beginning and end that might be in Libra or Sagittarius, but most of us have Pluto in Scorpio, and that makes you very drawn to the mysterious and the occult. So that's why so many of us are witches and into that. But based on like where it is and what house that's in, also gives deeper insight into what you might be good at in your practice. So if you're like feeling a little bit disconnected, or that what you had been doing before isn't working anymore, might be worth it looking at your birth chart and figuring out where your skills sort of are. And it just helps a lot in relating to other people, to just kind of know where things fall, that it's, it's not my fault when certain things come up in my birth chart and my personality and the way that I interact with the world, but it is my responsibility. So it helps knowing that information. And what I wish I knew, if you are just getting started out, hopefully some of these will resonate with you as well, or help direct you on your journey so you don't have any mistakes and regrets as I did. First up, I think everybody knows by now sort of where my path is, but absolutely wish I knew when I started that you don't have to be Wiccan. And when I started, everything was kind of Wiccan based, and all of the books read Wiccan, whether they used that word or not. And there was so much of that that didn't resonate with me because I don't like the religious aspect to it and the gods and goddesses. So that was not ideal for me. So I wish I knew that at the beginning, that you do not have to be Wiccan. It's completely separate. I also wish that I knew that you can change your beliefs at any time, and that specifically you are not going to believe what you believed 10 years ago. You are not going to practice the same way. It's just not going to happen, because you are shaped by your life events, and that changes how you approach your witchcraft practice. So whatever has happened to you in the last 10 years is going to change what you believe and change the way that you practice. So what worked for you back then might not work anymore. And that's okay. It is perfectly okay to change those beliefs. You are not stuck in believing that just because you felt that way before. Absolutely, you can change. And the same goes for your path in general. Maybe when you started out, you were really drawn to herbalism and green witchcraft and had the whole garden going, and maybe that's not calling to you anymore. It's okay to change that and change the path that you're on. And I am somebody that doesn't like change, and I get stuck in my ways. So that was hard for me, and I wish that somebody had told me that, like, it's okay. It's okay to change things. It's good when things evolve. But the flip side of that is to also remember not to change just because something isn't coming easily. I'm guilty of that as well. If I don't master something immediately, I tend to just drop it. Which is why I never was great at sports, didn't do too many sports growing up, especially things that involved like balls and bats and hand coordination, was not great for me, because if I couldn't master it in like one day, I didn't want to do it anymore at all. And you're just not good at something the first time that you try it. So that's always a bad habit of mine. And that came across in some witchcraft practices as well, of me just like quitting something because I couldn't figure it out like the first time. And I would like to stop doing that. That's something I need to, wish my younger self knew, and I need that reminder constantly now. I wish I knew, or things I would tell beginners, is that you can learn along the way. You don't have to have everything mastered first. The best way to learn is through practice and action. Especially when it comes to spells, you kind of just have to jump in there and start working, start doing things. And it's okay if you don't have every detail figured out first. You don't have to get all of the book learning done and know all of the theoretical information before you start putting things into practice. You really can just jump in and start doing the actual work. And the last thing that I wish I knew when I started was that I have plenty of time. I always tend to rush into things. I want to know all of the things all at once, just do a deep dive and have all of the information mastered within a month. And it's not practical. It's not good for my mental health. And I wish I knew that I had plenty of time to figure things out, that you don't have to master witchcraft in a month. I still don't have it mastered 15, 20 years later. So it's okay that I didn't know everything back then. It's okay that I don't now. I've got plenty of time to figure it out. There's no end game here. There's no final exam. Nobody's going to be testing me. So I've got plenty of time to figure more things out, and it's like a lifelong learning process. And the last little bit about my lifelong learning process, I want to talk a little bit about changing beliefs. I mentioned this in a previous video, and one of my patrons said that they would be, interested in hearing more about like what I have changed over the years, and like how I had some strongly held beliefs before that I don't necessarily believe in anymore. Because absolutely, your beliefs change over the years. So I wanted to touch on a couple of those, and I think I will talk more about this during October as well, some of my changing beliefs. So there's 3 that I wanted to highlight now. First up came to me because I was reading the book. If you watched my last book reviews, I've read Magic at the Crossroads by Kate Fowler, where she talked about like the devil and the devil archetype. And that made me realize that I have changed that belief where I used to be just like flat out, like, I don't believe in the devil. Part of that is still true, because the devil, as like a lot of people know, is a Christian construct. Like, it comes from the Bible, like the devil and Satan. But on the flip side of that, a lot of that imagery does come from like older pagan beliefs, like the horned god and things. And so before I was like, well, no, I don't believe in the devil. And that's usually still the case when, somebody who's Christian is like, oh my gosh, witchcraft is the worst, you're going to hell, like worshiping the devil or whatever. In that instance, I'm like, yeah, I don't believe in the Bible, so therefore I don't believe in your version of the devil and hell, so that's just not accurate. But my changing belief with that is now I agree with Kate's take in that book, where I see the devil and demons, things like that, as more archetypes that can be worked with, rather than, I just don't believe in them at all. I think that they can exist, and there is like this power in the whole world sort of believing in something or knowing the mythology or folklore behind something, that it kind of makes it a powerful entity, like an egregore. And that's sort of what I believe, that you can take those pieces and work with them as archetypes if you so choose. I still don't believe in the specific like Satan as written in the Christian Bible. That's not something I believe in, but I am more open to the idea of there being archetypes within saints and demons that can be worked with in a witchcraft practice. Second, sort of along with that, is that I am more open to spirits now as well. At the very beginning, I wasn't, because I just didn't feel like I knew enough, and I didn't feel safe. I absolutely always believed in them because I had a ghost friend as a child, and my mom had ghost stories, nothing scary, but just that they existed in our house. I just always knew that they were real. So I know that there are spirits, but I did not want to ever work with them or bring them into my practice. I always believed that there was just not a place for that. But that more came from a place of not knowing what I was doing. But now I know how to protect myself. I know what I would ask for from a spirit. It's still not something that I do very much. We have a brownie spirit in our house that helps around the house. So there's that. But as far as inviting a lot of other spirits in to work with me, I don't really have that much that I would be asking them to do. But I'm at least more open to the idea now, where at the beginning I was like, nope, don't believe that's a good idea, not doing that. Now I just feel like I know more and I'm more prepared. I know how to protect, I know how to banish, all of those things. So that just came from a place of learning more. And the last thing that I flipped in my beliefs, and actually went completely opposite on this, was doing spells when you are feeling a certain type of emotion. And I think when I started, that came from a very Wiccan belief that was in all of the books back then, was that you should not do spells on a whim and when you're in a heightened emotional state. And I think a lot of that came from the Wiccan belief of do no harm. So you shouldn't be doing spells that mess with other people's free will or would send harm to them. So it was don't be angry, don't do, automatically turn to a spell when you're feeling a certain way, because those emotions are going to mess with the spell. I think that more came from that belief that you're going to harm somebody else and you're going to regret that. So now I completely disagree with that. I go absolutely the other way, and I'm yes, emotions in all the spells, because the more heightened my emotion is, whether it's good or bad, the better it is going to fuel that spell. So if I am doing baneful magic, it's going to work a lot better if I am still angry about the situation. My heightened emotions are feeding the energy of that spell, and it's just more in tune with what I want to happen. It's the same with something that is happy. If I am feeling particularly excited or had a really happy, joyful day, I am feeding that then into a happiness spell, and it keeps that energy going. And I also will do spells if I'm feeling stressed or anxious. That was another belief that I think came across a little bit in the Wiccan tradition, was that you need to sort of wait until you calm down, because otherwise your depressive feelings are going to be in that spell. And I'm well, I want them to. If I'm feeling stressed or anxious, I'm not going to wait until it goes away. I'm doing the spell work to help me feel less stressed and anxious. So I'm channeling that into something else to get rid of it, get rid of that feeling outside of me. And the spell work is specifically going to help with those emotions. So now I think emotions fuel all of my spells. That is one thing I completely flipped my beliefs on. So those were the main three that I wanted to touch on. Hopefully you found that helpful. If you did, let me know, because I do have other things that when I sit down and think about it compared to what I believed 15 years ago, I'm oh yeah, I did change this. I am the other way. So if you want to hear more about that, let me know, and I will add those to my list for October to chat about. But those are all of the things that I want to mention: my regrets, my mistakes, the things I learned, things I wish I knew, and how my beliefs have changed. Hopefully that can help you along on your witchcraft path, especially if you are a beginner, feeling kind of overwhelmed, feeling like you might be making mistakes, you're not, well, you are, but it's a good thing and you are learning from that. And that is everything that I wanted to share for this video. I will see you in the next one.